Okay, my question is to Otis. Why was David Ruffin fired from the Temptations?
But I don't see how you could fire someone out of a group of that magnitude. I just think that was time for a change, and life lands a crushing blow sometimes.
Otis Williams just sparked new talk about David Ruffin's death. Was it really just an overdose?
David was a wonderful friend to have. I mean, we used to have a lot of wonderful, fun-loving boy stuff.
They say it was an accident, but what about the cash he had that night? And did he put his trust in the wrong people?
But I don't see how you could fire someone out of a group of that magnitude. I just think that was time for a change, and life lands a crushing blow sometimes.
Could his issues with Motown have gotten him into something dangerous?
But I don't see how you could fire someone out of a group of that magnitude. I just think that was time for a change, and life lands a crushing blow sometimes.
And what about the scratches on his body and his swollen head? Was it really just drugs, or was someone trying to shut him up? Let's dig into the secrets Motown didn't want out and find out why. Even after 30 years, people still ask, what really happened to David Ruffin? David Ruffin, the powerful voice behind My Girl, was at the height of his career when his life came to an abrupt and controversial end in June of 1991.
David was truly one of the world's greatest soul singers. And a great soul has gone on.
While the official report stated he died from a cocaine overdose, many close to him, including his own family, have suspected foul play. But why? What happened in those final hours of David's life that the world never saw coming? From the missing $35,000 cash to the mysterious way his body was dumped at the hospital, we'll unravel the layers of conspiracy theories that still surround Ruffin's untimely passing. Could David Ruffin have been targeted by people who wanted to get their hands on that cash? Was his death part of a larger plan to erase his influence? David Ruffin's death in 1991 was officially ruled as a cocaine overdose, but the official story has long been questioned by those who knew him best. While the world was led to believe that the former Temptations lead singer had succumbed to the dangers of addiction, many of his closest friends and family members firmly believe that the truth is far darker and more complex. The notion that David had relapsed into drug use after reportedly staying clean for quite some time raises a lot of questions. Why, after all these years, would he suddenly overdose? And if it was an overdose, why was his body seemingly discarded at a hospital with no one taking responsibility for getting him medical attention? This official story simply doesn't hold up when you start to look deeper into the circumstances surrounding his death. One of the most puzzling aspects of David's final moments was the large sum of money he was carrying at the time. According to reports, David was carrying $35,000 in cash, an enormous amount of money that would have been hard to ignore. This money had been earned during a tour he had just completed with fellow Temptations members Eddie Kendricks and Dennis Edwards, where each of them had been paid a hefty $50,000 for their performances. While Edwards and Kendricks had received part of their payment up front in cash and the rest via a bank draft, David insisted on receiving his entire payment in cash. He had decided to keep it in his briefcase, which was a clear indication that the money was important to him and likely something he intended to protect. But after he collapsed in the company of some unsavory individuals, his briefcase and the money it contained would go missing. So what happened to that money? Was it stolen? And why would this be so crucial to understanding David's death? According to Dennis Edwards, who had spoken to David earlier that day, the last time they spoke, David confirmed he had the money with him in his briefcase.
You know who came to my house at 12 o'clock at night before they called me? David Ruffin.
Yet, when David's body was returned to Detroit, neither the briefcase nor the money was with him. This raises even more red flags. Was David the victim of a robbery gone wrong? And if so, was this robbery the catalyst for what would follow? Was he targeted by those close to him who knew about the cash? This brings us to a theory that David's daughter, Nedra Ruffin, has been vocal about for years. She believes her father was set up for the money.
I was the last one to talk to my dad before he passed away.
According to Nedra Ruffin, David's daughter, there was far more at play than a simple drug overdose. She firmly believes that someone set her father up to steal the money. Her suspicions were further fueled by the fact that when his body was returned to Detroit, David was covered in scratches, and his head appeared unnaturally swollen. But the bizarre details don't stop there. Nedra also revealed that her father's clothes, covered in blood, were destroyed in Philadelphia before his body was transported back to Detroit. This destruction of evidence raised even more alarms. Was this an attempt to erase any traces of foul play? Given the fact that those closest to David knew he had been clean for some time, the idea that his death was caused by a sudden overdose seemed more and more improbable. Despite these troubling details, David's family was initially hesitant to pursue a second autopsy, even though the evidence pointed to the possibility of foul play. Their decision was swayed by David's brother Quincy, who warned them against pushing for further investigation. Quincy told the family that if they move forward with the autopsy, they might end up losing another family member. If you do one of those, one of you will be lying next to him. This chilling statement left the Ruffin family in turmoil. But what do the people closest to David Ruffin think about his death? When it comes to David Ruffin's death, the people who knew him best have always had their own suspicions. They were the ones who saw firsthand the changes in him, his relationships, and the environment surrounding him. Let's start with Martha Reeves, a Motown legend who had worked alongside David in the 60s. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about how his death was handled. In an interview, she openly questioned why David's body was left at the hospital and why no one tried to get him help sooner. To her, it felt like something wasn't right. David was a star, and he had people around him. Why was there no urgency when he needed help? Martha also suggested that David's struggles with addiction might have been manipulated by those around him. She didn't explicitly say it, but she hinted that there could have been people who took advantage of David's vulnerability, pushing him further into a dangerous lifestyle, knowing it would eventually catch up with him. This idea of manipulation gives weight to the theory that David's death wasn't just the result of his own choices, but that others might have had a hand in guiding him down that path. It's a thought that makes you wonder if someone might have seen David's struggles as a way to benefit themselves, even if it meant pushing him toward his breaking point. Then there's Eddie Kendricks, who was not only a fellow member of the Temptations, but also one of David's closest friends. Eddie seemed deeply uncomfortable whenever David's death came up in conversation. While he never directly said that David's death was a planned hit, he did suggest that David had trusted too many people who weren't worthy of his trust. This subtle admission from Eddie points to the possibility that David, as talented and successful as he was, might have been surrounded by people who weren't looking out for his best interests. In the world of fame, trust can be a rare commodity, and Eddie's comment paints a picture of David being let down by those who should have been there to protect him. And finally, there's Bobby Womack, another musician who had a complicated relationship with David Ruffin. Bobby believed that David had made far too many enemies in the music industry, especially as his financial troubles grew. It's no secret that the pressures of fame, money, and addiction can cause rifts between people, but Bobby suggested that David's problems might have pushed people to see him as more of a liability than an asset. When financial difficulties hit, people can get desperate, and Bobby believed that, in David's case, his enemies might have seen an opportunity to take advantage of him, whether that meant manipulating his situation or worse. All these perspectives from people who were closest to David Ruffin give us a glimpse into the complicated web of relationships and circumstances surrounding his death. While no one outright says that David was unalived, the hints and suggestions that his struggles may have been exploited, combined with the lack of immediate help after his collapse, make it clear that there's more to his story than meets the eye. Now let's talk about Suge Knight, former CEO of Death Row Records, who dropped a bombshell during a cryptic interview. Knight didn't name David Ruffin directly, but his words were enough to send chills down the spine of anyone familiar with the shady dealings in the music industry.
Everybody knew that Barry Gordy hits both sides of the fence, they always say. So Barry Gordy was the guy who had the Jackson 5. You would have a problem to say Barry Gordy was touching on Michael Jackson.
Could Suge Knight have been alluding to what happened to David Ruffin? Was the Motown machine orchestrated his demise to keep him quiet? Knight's cryptic statement raises even more questions, especially when you consider that Motown had already erased David from the business before his death. Before his death, David Ruffin had a difficult life. Born on January 18, 1941, in Wynette, Mississippi, a small town surrounded by cotton fields, David grew up in a poor but loving family. His father, Elias Eli Ruffin, was a Baptist preacher and truck driver, while his mother, Ophelia, took care of the home. The family was close-knit and found strength in their faith and love of gospel music. David was the third of 5 siblings, and they all helped each other through tough times. The Ruffin family often performed gospel music, opening for famous acts like Mahalia Jackson. These performances taught David the basics of music and how to connect with an audience. David's talent became clear when he sang in the church choir at Mount Salem Methodist Church. His voice stood out, and people started to take notice. By the time David was a teenager, he was eager to leave Wynot and chase his dreams. At 14, he moved to Memphis with a family friend, Reverend Eddie Bush, and quickly immersed himself in the local music scene. He performed in talent shows and local events, building his confidence and experience. Eventually, he performed with jazz musician Phineas Newborn Sr. in Hot Springs, Arkansas, where he adopted the stage name Little David Bush. At just 15, David joined the Dixie Nightingales, a gospel group that helped hone his vocal skills. He rubbed shoulders with music legends like Elvis Presley and Little Richard, which inspired him to pursue secular music. By 16, David moved to Detroit and recorded his first single, You and I, marking the beginning of his journey in the music industry. In Detroit, David Ruffin helped build Hitsville, USA, the future Motown headquarters, while living with Berry Gordy's father. He worked alongside Marvin Gaye and other aspiring artists, soaking in the creative energy. David also joined the Voice Masters, contributing to songs and showcasing his musical talent. I'm in love. David Ruffin's time in Detroit wasn't just about singing. It was about surviving and standing out in a city full of talented musicians. His deep, gravelly voice started to take shape, and he worked tirelessly, rehearsing like he was already performing on stage. He wasn't just a singer, he also contributed to backup recordings, treating every opportunity as a stepping stone. His transition from gospel to secular music was more than a career move. It was a personal change. The cultural shifts of the 1950s made him see music as a way to express the complexity of life, love, and ambition. In 1964, David crossed paths with Otis Williams of The Temptations. Though the group was already making a name for themselves, they were missing the right voice. David's gospel-trained vocals and strong presence made him the perfect fit. But it wasn't a simple journey. When one of the original members, Al Bryant, grew tired of the pressures of the music business, he left after a heated fight with a bandmate. That's when David joined the group, officially making his mark. His first session with The Temptations was in January 1964, and he quickly became known for his vocal talents and contributions, like inventing their iconic 4-headed microphone stand. When David first joined The Temptations, he wasn't immediately thrust into the spotlight. His role was initially limited to singing backing vocals. The group's leadership didn't yet see him as lead material, believing his voice lacked the strength to carry a hit. However, Smokey Robinson, one of Motown's top songwriters and producers, had other ideas. Robinson penned a song with David in mind, a soulful ballad that would showcase his unique voice and emotional depth. That song was My Girl. The moment David stepped into the lead role on My Girl, magic happened. His voice, rich and filled with heartfelt emotion, brought the song to life in a way that no one else could. I've got sunshine on a cloud. When the song was released in December 1964, it didn't just climb the charts. It soared, becoming The Temptations' first #1 single on the Billboard Hot 100. Suddenly, David wasn't just a member of The Temptations, he was the voice of The Temptations. With My Girl, The Temptations achieved international fame, and David became the group's centerpiece. Smokey Robinson and other Motown songwriters began crafting songs specifically for him, knowing his voice could deliver the kind of soul-stirring performances that turned tracks into timeless hits. The hits that followed My Girl were just as successful and included some of the most iconic songs led by David Ruffin. These included It's Growing, Since I Lost My Baby, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, Beauty is Only Skin Deep, I Know I'm Losing You, All I Need, Loneliness Made Me Realize, It's You That I Need, I Wish It Would Rain, and I Could Never Love Another After Loving You. Ruffin also shared the spotlight with Eddie Kendricks on the hit You're My Everything. Standing tall at 6'3", Ruffin's heartfelt and dramatic performances made him a favorite among fans of The Temptations. His powerful voice and emotional delivery brought something special to the group's sound. According to Otis Williams, Ruffin, affectionately called Ruff by the group, had a natural comedic side and was incredibly dedicated to his craft when he joined the band. His energy and personality lit up every performance, leaving audiences mesmerized. Ruffin's most notable non-vocal contribution to The Temptations was the masterminding of their trademark four-headed microphone stand. This enabled the other members to sing and do their dances without having to crowd around one microphone while the lead singer would sing into a separate microphone. His passionate delivery became synonymous with The Temptations' sound, and his stage presence, complete with his signature glasses and suave demeanor, made him a standout in the group. Meanwhile, often took the lead on other songs, alternating with David to create a dynamic that kept their music fresh and engaging. The group's harmonies were tighter than ever, and their choreography was just as legendary as their music. The Temptations weren't just singers, they were performers who knew how to put on a show that audiences would never forget. But with fame came challenges, and David's rise to stardom brought a new set of problems. As his voice and presence became central to The Temptations' success, he began to feel he deserved more recognition. The media and fans often singled him out, which only fed his growing ego. Female fans adored him, and he relished the attention, but his bandmates started to notice changes in his behavior. By the mid-1960s, David had also developed a cocaine habit, which only made things worse. The drug use, combined with his newfound fame, led to unpredictable behavior. He started making demands that alienated him from the rest of the group. One of his most controversial requests was to rename the group David Ruffin and the Temptations, following the trend set by Diana Ross and the Supremes. While David saw it as a way to acknowledge his contributions, the rest of the group saw it as a betrayal of their collective identity. The tension reached a boiling point in June 1968. By then, David's behavior had become increasingly erratic. He missed rehearsals, clashed with management, and continued to push for more control. The group had had enough. In a unanimous decision, the Temptations decided to let him go. It was a difficult choice, but one they felt was necessary to preserve their unity and continue their success. David didn't take the news well. After being fired, he attempted to rejoin the group by literally crashing their performances. In one infamous incident, he appeared on stage unannounced, grabbing the microphone mid-song.
So I guess that wasn't too appropriate, but they could have rolled with me if they wanted to.
After leaving the Temptations, David Ruffin set out on a solo career, releasing hits like My Whole World Ended, The Moment You Left Me. The song was a powerful reminder of his incredible talent and why fans were so drawn to his voice. But his solo journey wasn't smooth sailing. While he continued to put out music, his personal struggles often stole the spotlight from his professional achievements. But the drama in Ruffin's life didn't stop there. By this time, he had started confronting his demons, seeking help for his drug addiction for the first time. Unfortunately, trouble seemed to find him wherever he went. On his birthday in Memphis, he was arrested for refusing to leave a party and allegedly threatening police officers and their families. Ruffin denied making any threats and was released without bail. And the challenges kept coming. In the early 80s, Ruffin faced legal trouble again, this time for failing to pay over $310,000 in taxes from earlier in his career. He was fined $5,000 and sentenced to 6 months in a low-security prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. Luckily, he only served 4 months thanks to good behavior. Fast forward to 1986, Ruffin pleaded no contest to receiving and concealing a stolen Colt Point .32 caliber handgun. He got off with a $50 fine and $100 in court costs. But then, in 1987, he found himself in hot water again, arrested during a raid in Detroit. They charged him with possession of cocaine with intent to distribute less than 20 grams. He was found not guilty of possession, but was convicted of using the drug. And that, my friend, is just a glimpse of David Ruffin's wild ride, a life filled with fame, drama, and battles that were as intense as his unforgettable voice. So here's how things went down. In 1989, Ruffin got hit with 2 years of probation and 50 days of community service because he kept violating his probation. And since that wasn't enough, the court ordered him into drug rehab. he managed to complete a 28-day treatment program at the Ariba Castriol Institute in New York, which was a big step in the right direction. But despite his attempts to turn things around, and even after wrapping up a successful month-long tour of England with his fellow musicians Kendrick and Edwards, things took a tragic turn. On June 1st, 1991, David Ruffin passed away from what was ruled an accidental overdose of crack cocaine. Here's where it gets even more heartbreaking. Reports say Ruffin collapsed at a crack house in West Philadelphia. His friend Donald Brown was with him at the time and rushed him to the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. The medical team worked on him for nearly an hour, but sadly, at 3:55 a.m., Ruffin was declared dead. The official cause? An adverse reaction to drugs, specifically cocaine. But to this day, the death of David Ruffin remains one of the most controversial and mysterious events in music history. Was it truly an overdose? Or was this a calculated unalivement orchestrated by people in the music industry? The facts don't add up, and as we've seen, too many people had something to gain from David's death. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.